Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Well, hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
It is getting chilly and
oh my goodness,
the leaves are already changing.
I know. I looked at the calendar like just before we started this so I could date the show, and I'm like, how is it almost October? Where has the year gone? It's just flying by.
It has. I think when things just started moving again, they moved quick. A lot of good things have happened, as far as like our jobs and extension. We've been busy and
so busy.
It's
so busy.
But in a good busy, because I think a lot of good projects came off the ground. Last time we talked about the Master Gardeners and a lot of new stuff that they're doing, a lot of new interests that came out of 2022, and harvest is, if not happening now, will be happening through the next month. And things are starting to wind down.
They're starting to. There's still a lot going on, a lot of winter prep happening. I know there's some that are still getting their last cutting of hay up, waiting for the corn to dry down for feed. And so there's still a lot to do. And of course, the work on a farm is never done. But we are starting to see some Halloween decorations coming out. I kind of feel the same way about Halloween decorations as I do about Christmas decorations. And you got to wait for the month to start. But that's just my personal opinion. Each to his own.
Yeah, and what we're going to do today is talk about that transition. I know a lot of guys are getting their last cutting in. A lot of gals are also getting their last cutting in. Shouldn't be too specific there, but a lot of farmers, because we're all farmers here. So a lot of farmers are getting their last cutting in, and a lot of them are doing their soil testing. They're coming through the office. They're trying to figure out what their pH is, so they're ready for next year. Some people are talking about weed control, and from a chemical standpoint, now is the time that metabolism starts slowing on those perennials. I know we say that late in the summer is really the best time to apply those chemicals for a perennial kill. But, when things are slowing down, it becomes less and less manageable, less and less timely. Those plants won't react as quickly to chemicals as they normally would when metabolism's higher. So we have to adjust our approach. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is that transition and how to manage that and be ready to go come spring.
The winter annuals are starting to sprout right now. So there are some plants that are just getting reared up and ready to go. The biggest issue I find with fall weed control is bare soil. Bare soil is, the nemesis of gardening and farming alike. And it's a real detriment because as that soil erodes, it can blow away, it can wash away. But having those open spots is just inviting other weeds to come in. And so we're really closing that window to do a fall planting of grass seeds or rye. Rye, you still have a little bit of time left, but really think about when you are thinking about doing a weed control, what are you putting back in its place? How are you going to prevent this problem from starting again? And the best way to prevent that is to have a good thick coverage of what you do want on the ground.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wasn't there like in my mind yet. I was thinking I was still cutting cool season grasses, getting that last cutting in, but leaving some residual in there just for that cover. So your plants do have a little extra barrier over there, just so you're not getting too much open ground for those winter weeds to come up through and then give you problems come spring.
Yeah.
But, that's just that's a whole different show, different type of management. What we wanted to talk about today is, now that we're kind of going into the fall and things are slowing down and harvest is happening, we have discussed getting your soil test, putting down lime. But what about the equipment that we have? What about the things that we normally use that we go to? What should we do with those because we're not going to be using them as much. And we want to make sure they're ready to go come spring when the sun and rain are ready to go and the plants are ready to go. So we're all starting off with a good note.
That's right. Yeah. And that's an important thing is, especially when you're looking at equipment, that go back to that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If your lawnmower or tractor even is sitting with gas in it over the fall, winter, in those cold months, the air is going to condense, water is going to come out of the air as the molecules get closer together. You could potentially get water in your gas tank, and then come springtime, you've got a big problem on your hands, and it's going to be a pain in the butt trying to make sure everything's running properly. So that's going to be step one, right? Especially for your smaller lawnmowers, plan to run it dry. For some of the larger vehicles, you can put additives into it, like heat, to help manage that water accumulation. But for your smaller engines, it's really best to just run them dry.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. If you have a diesel tractor, you can go from number 2 diesel, which is like the summer diesel, spring diesel, which is a lot more efficient and has more power, to number 1 diesel, which is kind of a winter fuel. And that tends not to harden and to gellify, to gel. to gel in the winter and cause a lot of problems with your fuel system. So, now before we start getting into, because you don't want to get a freeze out there, surprise you, and then boom, you still got the wrong type of fuel in your tractor. But if you're looking at diesel, now is the time to start thinking about using more of a winter fuel so that it doesn't gel and it doesn't give you problems in your tractor. Along with that too is, if you're starting to put things away for the winter, make sure you disconnect your batteries, or make sure that you have a plan in place so that your batteries don't run dead and you have to replace them. Those are things to check for. Also, check for leaks. Now's a great time for maintenance, because if you don't do the maintenance now, things aren't going to get better for spring, and it might even be harder to get things running again if you do end up with problems in the winter. Because there's nothing that hurts a house and a vehicle more than just sitting there unmanned.
Yeah. And when you're looking at farm equipment, there's other things you want to consider beyond the fuel that's running the equipment. You have oil, of course, and you have hydraulic fluid. So those things do need to be changed. Make sure you're keeping up on your transmission fluid, and all of the other fluids that make your vehicles run so nicely. It's really important to have scheduled maintenance and to allow yourself time to get to that maintenance. There's a lot of work to do on a farm. It seems like there's always something to do. But for things that you're like, oh, well, I can just get to that next week. Oh, I can just get to that next week. And then the next thing you know, your hydraulic lines are clogged, and you have a really expensive repair on your hands. So you have to make sure that you schedule those routine maintenance activities, just because foregoing that, we all have heard about deferred maintenance and the nightmares that it causes. The weather's cooling down a little bit. It's not so hot. It's not hard to be outside at the moment. We have some really nice temperatures actually right now. Find those dry days and do your maintenance on your equipment. Get it cleaned up. Granted, it's going to get dirty again. The season's not over. You're still going to have to do stuff, but you do need to allow yourself time to do that cleaning and do that maintenance.
Yeah. And then for the home gardeners are out there, make sure that your hoses are drained. Make sure that you're checking your hoses, your equipment, again, for cracks, for defects on them. And now might be a good time to start replacing things, because you could probably get them on sale too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking it's a great time to check those clearance aisles. If you need to replace some things like hoses or gardening tools, it's a great opportunity to get some stuff at a lower cost if you have a place to store it.
Yeah, and shears and pruning saws, loppers, those are expensive things that we tend to just pull out every once in a while and then put away. Make sure you got them oiled. Make sure they're nice and sharp. You want to make sure that stuff stays well, because that cost can really add up. And that little bit of oil, a little bit of sharpening can really go a long way in keeping that equipment in good shape.
Yeah, I want to touch on sharpening especially because that really makes such a difference. And especially, let's say if you have fruit trees and you're planning to go out and start pruning in February, when everything is dormant, you're towards the end of the winter time, and you're trying to get out there before the sap starts flowing. Well, you really want to have your pruners ready to go. So get them cleaned and sharpened and oiled nice so that when that day comes where it's not so freezing cold outside, you can get out there and prune your trees with nice sharp pruners, because the best time to prune a tree is when your pruners are sharp. And that really makes an incredible amount of difference for the ability of the tree to reseal those wounds, the reduction of disease transference, and all sorts of other great things. So make sure, and of course your hand strength as well. You know, a sharp tool is going to reduce wear and tear on your own personal body as well.
That's right. And along with that too, since you brought up fruit trees, start getting a plan in place for those early springs. Typically, you're going to prune first, and then you're going to start doing some dormant sprays, especially on apples and pears. You're going to start using some horticulture oils for scale insects, mites. And for those grape growers out there, black rot is something that really sneaks up on you come harvest season. And it's something that you needed to do very early on in the lifespan of the grape.
Yeah, and a lot of these treatments, you're so right. It's very much a pre-bud break, at bud break. Those are some really critical times in protecting fruit crops. And sometimes you can't buy materials. You know, maybe your favorite gardening store isn't open till March and you need to be out there in February spraying. Well, stock up on those materials now. And like Dan said, put it on your calendar, scheduled time to go out and do those treatments on your fruit crops.
That's right. And have those chemicals in hand, stored properly, of course, stored at the proper temperatures so that early in the season you have them available and you're able to do those things. For black rot specifically, we're talking about something that come harvest, like a month ago, people were complaining that their grapes looked like shriveled up little raisins and they were hard. And, that's not what you want in a grape. So it's something that you need to spray at new growth, 4 to 6 inches long. And we're really talking like March timeframe. So for that, you need a fungicide like myclobutanil is great for black rot, and mancozeb's another good one that you can also use for black rot. But those are fungicides that are available for those things. But just have a plan in place now so that, as we go through winter, it's a whole different lifestyle. Come spring, you're not scrambling, and you can just look at the calendar. You can just mark your calendars now and then say, oh, I got to spray mancozeb now for black rot, or I got to spray myclobutanil for black rot because last year it burned me. This year I'm going to get ahead of it. Think about these things as we go into winter.
Speaking of pesticide applications, your spray equipment is one thing that you do not want to put off and getting it cleaned and ready for next year. If you think about letting those materials set in your tanks or in your spray nozzles for an extended period of time, you can really have a lot of damage to your filters. If the fluid expands because it's freezing, you could actually break your emitters, pop lines, and mess up your pipe fittings. So you really want to make sure that you get all the water out of your system before the temperatures start to drop below freezing. There are a lot of things on simple equipment and, of course, on your more expensive equipment that you really want to take care of and make sure that you are doing a thorough job of getting it cleaned up so that as it sits over the winter, that you're not actually seeing damage occur.
Right. So some of the things that we've kind of talked about is making sure that your tractor has the right fuel, making sure it's stored properly, thinking about the battery, thinking about your any blades that you have, make sure they're sharp, make sure they're oiled. We're talking about not leaving open ground after a harvest, let's say. And as you're going into winter, something else that you could do to kind of prevent that open soil is using mulch. And I know mulch is typically something that we talk about in the spring, but it can have many good winter uses as well. So when we're talking about mulch, it's just some kind of cover on the ground that's not a living cover as far as an actively growing plant, but it can be wood, it could be organic, it could be synthetic, it could be like rubber pellets I've seen. It could be, some people use plastic, but plastic isn't necessarily such a good insulator, but that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about mulch is insulators. So things that will protect from the cold going in, and also when you move it away, it helps keep like that heat come from the ground up as well. So you have to use it in the proper times to help protect your plants. I know some plants that really benefit from the use of mulch are things like roses. Mm-hmm. Roses are sensitive to like a really extreme cold, and they can have some significant dieback, and the roots can hurt as well. But by using that mulch going into winter on shrubs and roses, even if you have sensitive things like hardy figs, what else? Blueberries are another one. Having that mulch will protect those root systems so that they can overwinter well, and then they can come back and give you good fruit. And then you got that spray schedule that you devise, and you can start making sure that you have really good fruit come next year, about this time, maybe like a month earlier, so that you'll have success. But it's a year-long plan to keep this stuff going. And it really starts with some good winter planning so that come spring, you're as ready as Mother Nature is.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out some research. In orchards, in order to help control weed encroachment, because this is an ongoing issue in orchards, you have trees, you don't want to use a weed eater around them, but you also don't want to get out there and hand pull, around 50 trees. So some of the experiments that were done were putting down landscape fabric and putting down layers of mulch, and the combination of landscape fabric with wood mulch on top of it, using at least a 3-inch layer, did a great job at reducing any problems with weeds, and that the trees they did really well. They were very healthy trees, but we didn't have the problem of the other rows where we used some sprays or just landscape fabric to control the weeds. The mulch and landscape fabric did best. Mulch followed by landscape fabric, then chemical control. So really in an orchard setting, those types of controls are really great. So reach out to your local arboriculture company or your local tree pruners. And a lot of them have chips that they don't want to have to pay to discard. And a lot of farms have benefited from them dropping off these wood chips from pruning jobs.
That's a wonderful way to control weeds. But, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, but a lot of times we forget like how often we have to replace that wood mulch because it does decay. And what I have found is with a weed barrier and wood mulch, after a year or two, about maybe even 2 or 3, you'll start to get that lower layer rotting away. And what can happen is very, very hardy weeds can start growing in there. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. Things like sedges and things like annual grasses like crabgrass and foxtail, where they're actually growing on top of the fabric through some of that composted wood mulch at the bottom. And once that starts happening, it's a simple replacement of the mulch. And then you're back to good control.
Well, yeah. I mean, as with anything, weed seeds are going to come in, and it's not that the wood mulch is going to prevent wholly the weed seeds from getting established, but it's easier to pull them out of the wood mulch when they're starting.
A lot easier.
But for a larger farm scale, you have to put new mulch on top, and you will eventually get to see those weeds coming through, but then you can usually spot treat them with an herbicide or, go out and pull them out every once in a while. Mm-hmm. But yeah, mulch is definitely a labor saver.
It is. What I meant by that comment was it's not just fabric, mulch, and then you're never going to have to worry about it. You're still going to have to do maintenance on it, just like your tools and just like your vehicles and just like everything requires maintenance. There is nothing that doesn't. But it is something that you have to watch out for as far as like what your expectations are going to be when you do that.
Yeah, and while we're talking about doing some soil additives, I want to talk a little bit about fall fertilization. So, from some aspects, fall fertilization is a big no-no because what it's going to do is take your nitrogen is what I'm really focusing on here, because it's going to cause those plants to put on some new green growth, and that's not at all what you want them to be focusing on. So adding a fertilizer without nitrogen is great for woody plants, but for your garden in general, fall fertilization you don't really need to do a whole lot of, especially avoid nitrogen is the thing I really want to lean on.
Yeah, that's true. And that's especially true for perennial shrubs like roses, hydrangeas. If you give those plants going into fall, some people I've heard will say after July, no more heavy nitrogen fertilizers, or even just stay away from nitrogen altogether.
Oh, yeah.
If we're talking about perennial shrubs and trees, what happens is nitrogen stimulates vegetative leaf growth. And what that can do is that can overstimulate the shrub or the tree into producing a lot of new leafy green growth. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it delays that hardening effect going into winter. And then you end up with more winter damage because you're a little bit too nice to your plants at the wrong time. And, what I tell people is once a calendar flips from July to August, stay away from nitrogen on your trees and shrubs. Now, lawn care is a whole different thing. And pasture fields and hay fields, grasses are different. Grasses, they won't go as dormant as you think they will. And giving them a little nitrogen going into winter, like sometime in the fall, isn't necessarily a bad thing for grasses. But you got to make sure that you know what you're working with and the way that physiology of that plant works. If it's a tree if it goes completely dormant, like a tree or a shrub, be careful with that nitrogen. I would say avoid nitrogen use after July. But if we're talking about lawn, that's a little bit different. Giving it that extra bit of nitrogen does add roots and does add a little bit of vigor to the plant so that it can winter a little bit better.
Yeah, and when you're talking lawns, one of the best things you can do is to aerate the lawn in the fall. Get a plugger and go out and pull those little cores of soil out of the ground and let them lay all over the place. It's fine. But allowing that aeration to reduce the compaction from your lawnmower constantly beating it up all year, it's really helpful to getting good root growth and reducing some problematic weeds like creeping Charlie really loves compacted soil. And if you have a big problem with creeping Charlie, you probably have some fairly compacted soil. So aerating it annually in the fall can help with that.
And not cutting the grass too close.
For sure. But also, if you are fertilizing, don't over-fertilize. I mean, that's I've seen so many problems associated with over-fertilization because they want that fast, lush lawn growth, but it actually causes problems because it can cause it to grow too fast and doesn't spend enough time focusing on disease prevention and makes it too thick, so you have poor airflow, things like that. And of course, you can have fertilizer burn. If you add too much fertilizer, it can actually kill the plant. So that's another thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, so as we progress into October, just to give you a recap, drain those hoses, sharpen those shears, oil your equipment, make sure your sprayers are in good condition and drained. Make sure they're clean so there's no residue left. And remember that you're going to use those tools in February for dormant pruning if you have fruit trees, those early horticulture oils. And then soon after that, when it warms up a little bit, before you even see active greening of the plants, of the trees, make sure that you have those fungicide plans in place so that you don't get burned by black rot like so many people do when we're talking about grapes specifically.
Yeah.
But just come up with these plans now, put them on your calendar. Think about the battery and your equipment as well, either keeping them charged or just disconnecting them because you're not going to use that vehicle in the wintertime.
Yeah, and I want to throw out a plug for a really awesome publication from Purdue Extension. It's called Preparing Spray Equipment for Winter Storage and Spring Startup. It is a step-by-step guide on how to do anything that you might need to do to prep your spray equipment or tractor for winter, from how to check your fluid lines. It's got everything in it, lots of great pictures. I highly recommend it. Again, it's Purdue Extension's Preparing Spray Equipment for Winter Storage and Spring Startup. So I do encourage our farmers to look for that publication from the internet, or you can reach out to your local extension office. Again, Preparing Spray Equipment for Winter Storage and Spring Startup.
Yeah, a lot of great things you can do going into winter, and now is the time to start thinking about those things.
So we did talk about mulch, and of course I have to go back to that and throw in to make sure that your mulch isn't too deep. And in fact, as we're looking at our fall leaf litter, incorporating that leaf litter into your mulch is a great opportunity to help restore some of the nutrients that those leaves are taking out of the tree back to the tree. So as long as you're keeping your mulch, you can add about 1 to 2 inches of your new hardwood mulch, but also, mix in another inch of that leaf litter. You obviously don't want to have those volcanoes. We're a big no-no against volcano mulching. And you want to make sure your mulch is a good distance away from the trunk of the tree so that you don't offer rodents a nice place to spend the winter eating the living tissue of your bark. So make sure that you're getting that mulch to the right depth. And for gardeners, we're looking at, we're at the end of September. If you are done, you can't look at another tomato. You can't process another tomato. And so you're pulling the plants out. You're done with the garden for the year. You want to get rid of all that old leaf debris that may be carrying septoria leaf spot or other diseases associated with leftover plant litter. Get rid of that. Throw it away. Never compost diseased plants. Take all those leaves, put them on top of your garden, a nice thick leaf layer, throw some manure in between the layers to make sure that it has enough nitrogen to decompose. Is the only place I'm going to say put nitrogen on in the fall, is to make sure that you have that nitrogen there to help break down that leaf litter, because you've got to have a little bit of the N to go with the C, your carbon, your nitrogen. You got to keep that balance up. And if you don't do that and you pile all your leaves on your garden, come springtime, you're going to have that sopping thick layer on the bottom that's actually inhibiting moisture from getting into the soil. So do make sure that you're not just cramming a whole bunch of carbon on your garden. Use some grass cuttings or some manure, compost, or even just nitrogen fertilizer. Say you have it still in your spray container and you need to get rid of it. That's a great place to put it, is on your compost. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.